Hello, friend, and welcome back to episode 15 of my 31-day challenge, where I'm answering your questions about creating a career or business that you love. Do you like how I almost forgot my own rehearsed intro there? And also, it's taken me almost halfway through the challenge to realise I probably should have specified in that opening that I'm specifically talking about career advice and business advice for the virtual reality and immersive industries, although it's very transferable to lots of other different industries. But anyway, let's get into it. In today's episode, I'm answering the question, what kind of roles are there on a VR production? And by VR production, I'm assuming this person is talking about mainly 360 filmmaking, but we might dive in a little bit into VR experiences as well. Who knows? So if you've got a question, obviously we're halfway through now, but if you want your question to be featured on one of the other episodes, then please send it to me. You can find me, Alex Makes VR, across any of the social medias. You can send a longer question if you want to give me a bit more context to alexmakesvr@gmail.com. And every single day, I am emailing people with my daily newsletter to let them know when these episodes go live and to give them a bit of a recap about what I talk about in that episode. So if you would like reminding when these episodes go live, or you'd just like me to pop into your inbox first thing in the morning to say hello, then you can sign up at alexmakesvr.com. So what kind of roles are there on a VR production? And I'm going to be making a lot of references to kind of traditional filmmaking because it is quite similar, but just with some variations. So the first thing that I want to say is, theoretically, you could have just one person on a VR production. You know, like you could be, I sometimes just call myself, because I don't really know what kind of title to give myself anymore, because it really depends on the project. Oftentimes I'll just call myself a VR creator, because there's still a lot of things that I do that I just do myself, like, because I know enough of all the different kinds of roles that you need on a production to be able to wear all of those hats. And I would say, especially if you're starting out, potentially that would be a really good place to start, or even just getting on a production just so that you can learn a bit about all those different roles. But really, I find that knowing a little bit about every single one of the roles that you do need for a VR production really helps, because then as you scale, as you do work on bigger productions, if that's what you want, as you do work with more and more crew, you kind of have an understanding about what every person should be doing. And oftentimes, you know, I've been on sets definitely before where, for whatever reason, one of the tech guys, and I hate to make it make it a sexism thing, but this never happens with tech women, and by tech I mean like someone who's more working on like the camera operating side, or the person that's kind of like got quite a technical role. They will assume that I don't know, you know, about their particular job role or what they're doing, and so they'll make it out to be a little bit more complex than it needs to be, or something like that, or they're just, you know, they labor the point, or they make it out as if it's like quite you know, this is going to take this much time, but I'm very well aware that it doesn't, because I've done it myself and I know enough about it to know that. Not to say that, you know, you should undermine people and you should patronize them and assume that you know more than them, because that's absolutely not the case. Because if someone's dedicated, you know, their years and their of training and learning and having experience, they obviously will have like a very specialized skill set and know a lot more than you. But it is helpful, because sometimes people can take the piss and like want to pull the wool over your eyes and be like, oh yeah, I'm going to do that, but it'll take, you know, let's say it'll take a week to stitch that footage, when it's like, that is definitely like a 2-day job. Anyway, so having said that, let's talk about some of those different roles. So again, totally depends on the budget, totally depends on what gear you're using as well. But let's say like a fairly standard sized, kind of small crew, but, big enough to have people in the different departments, but small enough so that, it's not like a massive film set where you've got assistants for the assistants to the person who is assisting the director, because that's my biggest bugbear with big film and TV shoots is like a lot of times you just think, is it necessary to have that many people? And what's actually, just to go on a little tangent, what's funny about COVID is the unintentional kind of reevaluating of who is necessary in a crew has been really interesting to watch, because obviously as we have to think about social distancing, as we have to think about having minimal people exposed and on a set together, I don't think it's a coincidence that you're starting to see more and more people have to take on a few different jobs for themselves. Whether that is right or wrong, that is open for debate. But I think that's personally something the film and TV industry definitely has needed to do for a while. But anyway, coming back to VR, it's almost like I'm got a grudge against those industries, isn't it? I swear I haven't, although I do harbour, resentment for my own kind of experiences in the TV industry. But anyway, so production roles. So the number one kind of person that you kind of need is the director producer. Sometimes that they can be separate. Oftentimes I will produce and direct my own projects just purely because I like to be involved from the very beginning in those conversations about budget. I like to be in control of the logistics of a project as well. But I have worked on projects where it's just too big and I can't do everything. And, so I've delegated it out to a producer, and you work with a producer. So the difference between a director and a producer, the director is looking after the creative vision of a project generally, and the producer is looking after the more logistical and kind of, I guess they're just a bit more practical on those sides. They can also, depending on what kind of project you're working on, they can also be more of the point of contact for the client. They can be the one securing the budget in the first place. In the context of like a corporate shoot, a producer acts similarly to how, I guess, a first assistant director would act in film and TV, which is that they're essentially there to keep everything running on time. They are also the kind of the person that crew ask a lot of kind of practical questions. We need a place to put kit, for example. We need a petty cash to, because one of our wires is broke, that kind of thing. So a producer tends to look after the more practical side of things, and the director tends to look after the creative vision of the project. So they will most likely be involved with the storyboard and the scripting side of things, but when you get on set, they're kind of like the captain of the ship. They will often be the one to make decisions about things like where actors are going to sit, or subjects, depending on what kind of shoot you're doing. What's the kind of look and feel of the project? Where you're putting the camera? What is that final thing going to look like? And they're essentially tasked with making sure that you capture what you need to capture in order to bring the project to life. That's kind of like the best way I can really describe being a director. Essentially, you're just the captain of the ship. If it goes wrong, it's your fault, basically. Which is why I like to be a producer and director, because I find it quite difficult to hand off the controls. I'm a bit of a control freak in general, but I find it difficult to hand off the controls for the practical side of things, because I think that they're so intertwined with the creative. And often, especially if you're an independent creator and you're not working with, 6-7 figure budgets, you will have to make creative decisions that align with the budget you've got or the time you've got. And so much of that is intertwined. So sometimes I just think, yes, you can bring in an extra pair of hands to help produce, but oftentimes it's nice to have your foot in and kind of work either really closely with your producer or just kind of do a bit more of that yourself, so that you're totally aware. Because I think the biggest thing for me when I kind of see, or when I work with directors who are purely directors, and often like, yeah, on creative projects, on like fully original creative projects, go crazy, go mad, and then the producer kind of works on trying to get you the money to bring that to life, or the exec producers do. It's kind of like, in those industries or in those circumstances, it kind of works the other way around, because the director and the writer kind of like, build something, that they build the vision first, and then you look for the funding retrospectively. But the majority of corporate work and the majority of independent creators who are getting things like grants from arts kind of bodies, or, funding it themselves, it's the opposite way around. The budget does dictate what you can achieve. So that's kind of like those main key senior roles. And then the next big role is obviously going to be your camera person. In cinema, you would call them a director of photography. Sometimes, I do tend to call them a DOP, but they are more of a technical person than a DOP actually is, because a director of photography, in cinema anyway, is exactly what it sounds like. They are in charge of like the director. They're literally creating the look that the director wants. So often that will be things like, the kind of lighting that they want in a scene, the kind of lens that you use on a camera to get a certain feel. They'll be in charge of taking what the director envisions and then actually making it possible with cameras. But the thing is with 360 cameras is that role is a lot more technical, and that person needs to be a bit more technically minded. And of course, yes, it's phenomenal if you can work with a trained DOP in 360, where they can bring that knowledge of lighting and getting that cinematic feel to the production. But because you've got less options with that, because lighting can often be a massive headache in 360, so not a lot of productions have the budget in post-production to be able to use a lot of lighting other than just kind of practical lights on the location, to have a DOP. And also things like, you can't, your 360 camera has fixed lenses. It has fixed focus. So you can't create like things like shallow depth of field. You can't. I remember once actually doing a keynote, and someone who was speaking before me said that, what did he say? He said that 360, we use 360 cameras like a DOP would use lenses. So it's like you use a different 360 camera for a different shot to get a different feel, to have different kind of spec. And I really agreed with that. So what he meant by that is, in traditional film, you might use, and I don't know because I'm not a DOP by any stretch of the imagination, but you might use a wide angle lens to create a feeling of like distortion, and like kind of a lot of YouTubers use it to create that kind of feel of like, it kind of, the outside is kind of slightly distorted, and then your focus is kind of drawn to the center of the frame. It's like got a really nice look to it, very signature look. But you wouldn't use that necessarily for, I don't know, an emotional intimate scene. That you would probably use something more like, I don't know, like a 50mm lens or something. So depending on what the scene needed and practically what it needed, but also what kind of feel you wanted to create with it, a DOP would choose kind of what lens you would use. But in 360, because they're fixed focus, and because you can't do that with lenses, you might, for example, maybe more like on a technical note, but you might, I really want an up close kind of, I want a shot where we like completely change perspective and we're like, crawling on the floor or something. I want to give the sensation of being small, like a mouse, and crawling along the floor. Well, all of a sudden, you're not going to be able to use an Insta360 Titan for that shot. So that DOP or that camera operator, whatever you want to call them, that person is going to have to know, okay, well, to achieve that kind of shot, we're going to have to go to more of like a 2-lens setup. We need to kind of watch out for things like stitch lines and things like that. So we're going to need XYZ. We're okay in terms of like getting it to move. Like we want to use, I don't know. Anyway, you get the point. So yeah, using 360 cameras the same way as someone would use, like for example, again, like even just like that's quite an extreme example, but we try and use the 360 Titan on the most recent kind of client shoots that I've been doing. And it's a phenomenal professional camera. The quality is absolutely insane. But it's massive and it's got loads of lenses, and it's a real problem when the client wants to shoot in a really small room. It creates a massive headache. So actually swapping over to something like a Candow Obsidian or an Insta360 Pro, a smaller bodied camera that's got slightly less lenses, slightly less quality, but you're not going to have to worry about all those decisions in post-production. You want, again, this is just even me talking about this though is an example of like why you need to know a little bit of everything. Because if I was working with a DOP and I didn't know any of those things, I don't know, I feel like maybe it wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing because it's delegating out to that person. But I just feel way more secure that I know that knowledge in my head, so I can make those decisions ahead of time. It speeds everything up on set. I already know what shot I want. I already know the complications that are going to come with it. And so I can make those decisions on the fly without having to wait for someone else to give me their expertise and tell me why that's not possible, if that makes sense. So key roles so far: producer, director, camera operator or director of photography, whatever you want to call them. The next key piece of the puzzle is obviously sound. Sound is massively overlooked. I admit that it's the area that I know the least about. I work with a phenomenal sound engineer, Luke Harris, who is he's just such a lovely guy. We worked together first on Key to Like, where I kind of, somehow miraculously got introduced to him, and he came and worked on that and gave his time to come and work on that project just because he was like curious and passionate about 360 and spatial audio. And over the years, we've worked together on several projects, including a lot of the big budget kind of commercial work that I've done. And the thing I like about Luke is he can really translate a lot of the technical audio-y stuff into layman's terms. So I've managed to kind of learn a lot about the stuff that I need to know about audio from him. When it comes to spatial audio, obviously that is a massive consideration for projects. I have next to zero knowledge in the post-production side for spatial audio, which is why I would never kind of take on a project by myself without having budget to bring someone in like Luke to do that. But on the audio side of things, again, like because I kind of like started as like in the TV industry as a filmmaker with a filmmaking background, I kind of knew enough about audio, enough so that the average person wouldn't know the difference. Like I knew how to capture basic audio, and although I wouldn't be able to mix it in post-production to make it spatialized, I know enough about that to kind of have an idea of when a production will need that kind of high quality audio. So the next piece of the puzzle is an audio engineer, someone that comes on and they just look after the sound. I use Luke, who does not only the recording on set, but also in post-production. But you might end up using kind of two different people for those roles. And you just want to make sure that the process, or the kind of fluidity of that process between one person working on it and in on production and in post-production, just make sure that those people communicate really well with each other and they both understand what needs to kind of happen, and make sure that your audio person, or if you are going to go into audio, make sure that you really label your takes. One of the biggest headaches is if they're not labelled properly, and then you get into the edit and trying to, because obviously the audio capture on the 360 cameras is shocking. So to try and line up the right shot with the right audio can sometimes be a headache if you've not labelled it properly. So that's a big one. So you've got, those are the 3 key components to any production. So if you were just going out by yourself, you would wear your producer director hat to kind of get the project off the ground, to make the timeline for it, to get the budget for it somehow, to set the creative vision, to have the idea. You would then have a camera with you to capture it. You would know enough about that camera to know its limitations, to know things about lighting, to understand stitch lines, that kind of thing. And sound, obviously, mainly if you're capturing something that actually needs sound, you'll understand about capturing sound. Those are the 3 key roles on any production. And then obviously, as you start to work on bigger productions, or as you kind of expand out, or as you get more budget, the next key person, in my opinion, is a visual effects supervisor. So this only really became apparent to me when I started to work on bigger productions, where the people working on the production side were not necessarily the same people that were going to be working on the post-production side. And for the most part, generally for a lot of projects I do, the crew that do the production tend to also be the people that do the stitching and do the kind of the compositing and the editing and that side of things. But when that isn't the case, having a visual effects supervisor on set is so important if you're going to do things like compositing out lighting rigs, or plating a shot so that, for example, if your crew are in the shot, plating so that, in post-production you basically composite them out. That's really important. It's really important to have a visual effects supervisor on set to be able to say, okay, well, if you want to be able to get that shot, then you're going to need to be over there. You're going to need to step back there. You cannot cross that line. And obviously, these are the considerations that are so different in 360 versus traditional filmmaking. So having someone I call them a visual effects supervisor, but they could just be like a post-production supervisor. They need to be someone that is going to be involved with the post-production and who can kind of safeguard some of the decisions you're making on location, to say that's going to be a problem in post. Because unlike film, where the classic saying is, oh, well, we'll fix it in the post, that is 10 times as harder and 10 times more expensive in 360 generally. So you absolutely don't want to try and fix it in post. You want to account for it before you've even started shooting. So things like, if you're shooting near a window, making sure that your action is on the other side of the camera so that you can easily plate out the window. Again, having lighting in set, crew in set, anything like that. It's funny, I remember that same keynote, the same guy that said about how we use 360 cameras as like a traditional DOP uses lenses. That same guy said that every 360 shoot is a visual effects shoot. And it's so true, because even if the smallest kind of visual effects that you're doing is stitch lines, and making sure that people aren't crossing stitch lines, too close, so that you can't kind of, go around them in post to make sure that they're not like splitting in half. Even something as simple as watching a stitch line that is a visual effects. That's a post-production job, right? That's something that a visual effects supervisor would be picking up on. Because if you did, and I mean, that's one of the things with the Titan, is their stitch line, I mean, it's been a while since I've shot with a kind of production with the Titan, but the stitch lines are really quite, bad is the wrong word, they're just quite prominent because of the fact that it's such a big camera. So the stitch lines are quite kind of like prominent if you're shooting quite a small space and you've got people relatively close to the camera. So every single one of those shoots, we have to be really careful about not placing an actor too kind of close to that, or if they are going to walk past it, generally speaking, we'll need to make sure that we've got enough of an overlap from another lens to make sure that we can go in visual effects composite around the clip, so that when they move past the stitch line, you're actually swapping between the two images to make it look as if there's nothing kind of wrong, so you don't see the seam line. So that would be my other key person. And then from there, basically, it's kind of like, well, you could just keep on expanding depending on how big you want your crew. But, you know, you could have a script supervisor, you could have production runners to like help out with the, or production assistants who kind of look after, you know, the crew basically, and do the menial things like, which is so important though, is like, I say menial, but I don't mean that in a degrading way, because they're such a key role on the shoot to make things run smoothly and to make sure that everyone's kind of like not stressed and not hangry. Looking after kit, you've got, you know, you could start to go down the road of like camera assistants, clapper board holders, you've got DITs, which I think stands for digital imaging technicians. They're the ones that can be looking after your media files. So once you've done a shot, they can take the SD cards from the camera and they can back up all the footage, and, you know, they kind of look after that side of things. They're kind of like the person that goes in between. They are the person that connects what you've shot on set to what gets to the post-production house. So quite a key role. And, you know, you could just keep expanding out really as much as you want. You could have makeup and hair on set. You could have grips on set their whole job is to rig the things like tripods and cranes and jibs and all of these fancy pieces of equipment that realistically you probably don't need on a 360 shoot. So yeah, I mean, obviously it's never ending, but in general, let's recap the key roles on a VR production, and by VR I'm talking specifically about 360 production, are a director producer, a camera operator, a sound engineer, and then a visual effects supervisor if the person that's doing camera is not also working on the post-production. And then obviously once you get into kind of post-production, then you need, well, again, generally speaking, I mean, I started by doing it all myself, so I know how to stitch and I know how to edit. I know a little bit about After Effects to know enough how to do basic compositing, but mostly I use my brother for that, because my little brother is a visual effects and an After Effects. I don't even know. Well, he's a wizard basically. But I know enough of that to kind of know my way around that if I needed to. But so you could break it down like as much as you want really, but realistically you need someone to look after the stitch, someone that looks after the edit, someone that looks after the color grade, someone that looks after the audio post-production. But again, that can all be one person really. It depends on how much budget you've got and whether you want to delegate out those roles. The other big thing about keeping it all quite tight and having as small a crew as possible is I quite like that then there's not as many breaks in the links of the chain, if that makes sense. The more people, I found anyway, the bigger productions that I do, the more things go wrong, and it often comes down to miscommunication, or there's just more complications with working with more people. So obviously there's a time and place for it, but if you can try and keep it as concise and small, I often find that it creates a more collaborative environment, but also it's just a lot easier to get the job done and to kind of oversee everything and make sure that there's not as many breaks in the chain. So, wow, this one's nearly half an hour. What a ramble. If you enjoyed that, let me know. Let me know if that was useful, because a lot of this, if you work in 360, you maybe already know, but I'm guessing for a lot of you listening, this has potentially been quite informative and been quite useful maybe to hear the breakdown of those roles. So let me know. Either way, I would love to hear from you. Alex Makes VR on any of the social medias. You can also ask me a question that way. You can ask a question at alexmakesvr@gmail.com. And if you want to sign up for the newsletter to be reminded daily when these episodes come out, it's alexmakesvr.com. I'm going to go have a sip of water, and I'll catch you tomorrow.